This is Richard Carranza here with Houston Energy Industry News, and I'm having the pleasure today of interviewing Laura Gimpelson. She is the head of LG Environmental Engineering, located in Nashville, Tennessee. I knew Laura back in the good old days here in Houston when we were working for the various engineering design firms, and Laura has a degree from Georgia Tech in chemical
Yes.
engineering and has had almost her entire career working in environmental engineering as well as some experience with the EPA, I believe. Is that right, Laura?
Yes, I spent 15 months working as an enforcement officer with EPA in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah. So, Laura, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your company and what you do.
LG Environmental is a sole proprietorship registered in Texas, Tennessee, and Florida. It is also a continuing education provider for PEs and recognized in 36 states, including Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, and Texas. I work on various environmental, from developing asbestos remediation plans to cleaning up excess sink and stormwater, just about everything in between. I've done compliance audits, remediation, spill cleanup, program management, training, and writing lots and lots of plans.
Lots and lots of plans, huh? All right.
Yeah.
Well, tell me something. Have you got anything in the pipeline right now that you're working on that's kind of new and exciting?
Not really. I am doing a few, even with this coronavirus, few site assessments for Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae that are a result of the tornado that hit Nashville 3 weeks ago. They really want to get some of the facilities under construction. Some of them may be needed for warehousing, medical supplies, or manufacturing of some of the medical supplies that may be needed in the next few weeks.
Is that connected in any way with asbestos or with mold and spores and those sorts of things?
Not really. Many of the buildings in the particular area were built in the 80s and 90s. So by then, lead-based paint and asbestos building materials had been banned, although some of them may still be around. This is more just general condition and looking at just how much has to be rebuilt versus repaired.
I see. Well, down here in Houston, we always like to get new insights into what's going to happen to our business. Um, and you have a lot of experience here in the Houston
Yes.
area as well as in the environmental business. What do you see going on down here in the next year or so in Texas as far as environmental engineering or environmental studies go?
I believe there will be more studies looking at land use, especially after Hurricane Harvey, with all the flooding and some of the explosions that occurred at the chemical facilities.
Yeah.
Local government and state government is really looking at whether or not buildings should be rebuilt in the same areas that may have flooded.
Oh,
Harvey
yeah.
flooded 2 years before, then flooded in 2012, and maybe flooded in Ike.
Maybe it's time to
Also look
move.
at changing as we cruise, and we have driven down Highway 146 and the Boulevard Peninsula roads, and we have seen after Ike, houses had to be raised 25 feet. And we know that this is a big thing because the HVAC units have their own little balcony 25 feet above the ground. And there's metal stairs going up to it in some places that have the money, and others they have to use a man lift to get up there to repair it, check out the refrigerant.
And unbelievable.
But you do see how
Unbelievable.
all the new houses are built 20 feet above the ground. Just about everything is up the 20 feet. If they have the money, they put in elevators. We also see vendors that advertise on billboards that they can now install elevators in any house.
Gosh. Well,
So many areas, especially in Ireland and along Brays Bayou and behind the Addicks Reservoir and Bear Creek, Glencairn, I really have to look at what should be the best land use. And as a result of the explosion that occurred in Chocolate Bayou on the east side,
Yeah, Crosby.
The plant manager and several of the other top management are facing criminal charges. And that particular case will probably set up some additional requirements, again, for land use and building permits and how much of your pumps and pipelines and reactors are going to have to be elevated.
Yeah, you're talking about
what additional secondary backup power may be required in the plants to prevent something happening in the future. And taking into consideration what happened at your facility during Harvey. How flooded did it get? Or it may not have flooded, but none of the workers could get there because everything else was flooded.
Yeah, you're talking about the Akima plant, I believe.
Yes.
Out in Crosby, just north of, I forgot the name of the city you just mentioned, but it's out that way.
Bayou.
Chocolate Bayou, yeah, it's out that way.
It is surprising that it is a criminal case and not a civil case as they have been in the past, but this may have just been something that the emergency responders have gotten tired of.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah,
they may not be told everything. I have been in environmental management position and had to work with local responders, including the U.S. Coast Guard in the Beaumont, Port Arthur, Tri-County area.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing, every fire chief, every police chief, and every Coast Guard officer I dealt with was the fact that I was very open with the information. And I could explain even another company's information in language that they could understand. In fact, they were so happy to have me, they gave me a civil defense card, which would let me in any area if there was a disaster. They would, even though I lived 100 miles away, they wanted me to come in and work on and help them with the cleanup or response. And they also checked my area to see if a chopper could land in front of my house.
Yeah, I think that's part of what the charges against Akima are all about, actually, aren't they? It's related to that as well. And well, one of the things that has been on everybody's mind for some years, and I don't think anybody even talks about it anymore, but do you see any dangers from fracking to the environment? All that water down there and swishing around and coming back up and whatnot?
Yes, there is some damage with the fracking water. Dealing with trace chemicals that can be more dangerous within the environment versus being within the ground. Plus, you never know what the water pressure is going to do underground. In Houston, there's quite a few mud faults. And if you get too much water pressure, you will split open the mud fault and you'll create a sinkhole.
Oh, I think that is happening already. Yeah. Right. I heard about
Florida,
that. Yeah.
I was more aware of it in Florida because Florida is sandy and it's very easy to get sinkholes that will eat cars, houses.
I saw that too. Horrible.
So, depending on how they set up the charge, and I'm not a geologist, but I just know if you apply too much pressure, you break things. And if you have a pre-existing fault in the area where you're fracking, you may accidentally open that fault and bring in parts of the petroleum field that you're trying to recover, the nickel, the vanadium, and some of these sulfur chemicals that will come out pathways you don't expect.
Wow. So I guess that's what people are saying, that you could possibly contaminate the groundwater.
Yes, because it's all interconnected.
Which is sad.
There's been a few articles in Popular Mechanics of all magazines objecting to the changes to the definition of jurisdictional waterways of the United States based on their experience dealing with plumbing and drainage issues and septic fields. And I read the article and I was surprised because Popular Mechanics is not a politically oriented magazine. It normally doesn't get involved with environmental issues. But they were worried about the drinking water supply that they do deal with and their readers deal with.
Well, that brings up my favorite question of natural gas flaring. They're worried about raising these houses in Galveston 20 feet, right? Well, they could also fix the problem by just not sending out so much carbon as they do. The Texas Railroad Commission has given full permission to everybody out in the Permian, well, at least before Corona hit, to just let the spigots go, burn it all up. What do you think about all this fracking stuff?
I think the flaring on fracking is probably a waste of valuable resource.
No doubt.
I mean, it's the easiest, but even if there's 100% combustion, which there isn't, there are a lot of trace impurities that you're dealing with.
Free radicals.
Not necessarily that. Depending on where they're fracking, if they're fracking in the lignite fields or in the coal fields, as a result of a term paper I did in college on mineral processing and extraction, I was amazed at how much radioactive material is in some of these streams. Yes. To the point where certain streams weren't allowed to be used for some of the federal government's research and liquefaction of coal at the coal bed in the mountain. It would release more radioactive material than a power plant.
I don't believe it. Wow. No, that's of interest to me because I go every year to something called a NORM conference.
Yes.
Normal something.
Occurring radioactive material. When we do environmental site assessments, when we get to the phase 2, we're trying to determine the presence or absence of normally petroleum products. We do have to worry about NORML in many of the areas that we investigate, especially if it's a former oil and gas field from the 40s and 50s, or it's near one of the lignite fields that is being used for power plants. I also ran into it in all places, a former Army Air Force facility in Illinois, where none of us thought we had to worry about radon and some other radioactive materials.
Oh, right.
Or a petroleum tank spill that occurred during World War II, until the lab sent the samples back saying our radioactive Geiger counters went off and we're not qualified to test the sample. And the lab that does their radioactive sampling wasn't qualified to do petroleum products. So it took about 6 months for the Corps of Engineers to find a lab that could do both tests on the same sample.
How horrible.
And it was a sole source because they thought it was rare, but as they got into more and more of these formal military facilities from World War II that they're trying to clean up, since now they've become prime real estate for residential development, they had to do both petroleum from all jet fuel or diesel, radioactive, and half of them were next to the former firing range, so we also had to deal with lead contamination.
Well, let me ask you this, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot a little bit, but so many companies and the government is doing so much talking about we need to save the planet, and yet they open up those flaring processes and just burn up all that gas. And they didn't plan ahead of time to make sure they had the pipelines in place before they started fracking, and there just wasn't a whole lot of coordination going on. Remember, we we were supposed to be importing LNG, and then all of a sudden we changed it and we went back to exporting LNG, and so all those plants were built, they had to convert them all. Is anything significant going to get done with trying to reduce global warming here in the U.S., you think?
I would prefer they didn't use it global warming more as back to good old-fashioned energy efficiency, resource conservation.
Right?
We don't have unlimited resources.
Yeah, that's true.
In fact, as you know, I'm Jewish, and
Yes.
in our Sabbath services, we have a prayer where we compare the difference of what we're doing during the week versus what we do on the Sabbath. And in it says, during the week, we think of Earth as an unlimited supply of resources. On the Sabbath, we sit back and admire what we have and what we need to preserve.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's something we do weekly. We know we don't have unlimited resources. We need to make the most efficient use of what we have. And we need to really look at, is this the best use for what we have? Like Harvey showed us, Hurricane Harvey showed us just how much flooding can occur. Granted, it was a 1 in 1,000-year experience, but it's something that we need to really look at and say, okay, this was once in 1,000, but areas around Bray's Bayou and some of the other bayous, this was the third time in 10 years that they've flooded. And I wish FEMA would just go ahead, buy the land, convert it to golf course wouldn't be bad. I mean, so it gets flooded every 3 years.
Yeah.
And do that in other areas that have had significant flooding, especially the last 20 years. That we don't just rebuild for what's there, but we rebuild taking out what has happened and plan for the future. We're not doing enough planning and anticipating based on what's happened, say, last 5 years.
I think that's well said, really. I do. I go every year to a conference called Sarah Week here in Houston, and I have been trying to say the same thing you just said, but I didn't. I use a completely different way of saying it, but but there's no hiding it at Sarah Week with those guys when we talk about this, or when they give presentations, that the oil industry really has to become more efficient. It can make a profit of $40 per barrel oil. It's just that we're not efficient, and I think you put it even better in that we have to make effective use of our resources because they're not infinite. And Laura, I tell you what, man, it's great seeing you again. Haven't seen you in a while, and thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. I enjoyed this.
All right, well, talk to you later. Bye bye. Now.
Okay. Bye.